Hello and welcome back to Rage Gaming. My name is Olo and this is of course Elden Ring. We're back once again for a tier list. I recently covered my top picks for Ashes of War, but now it's time for Incantations. Of course, just like the Ashes, there's so many to pick from, so I've got about 20 plus of my top picks, then rated them against one another. So if an Incantation is on this list, that does mean it's a strong pick worth using, but naturally some are better than others in how much value they bring. With that said then, let's begin. We're doubling up to get it straight out of the way because I think we all know it. Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength are two of the best incantations in the game. There really isn't a build that's not going to benefit from dealing a bit more damage. And of course these two buffs, well, they're going to provide that. Now Golden Vow does a little bit more for a bit more FP, also providing you with some defense, and will work in most every build. Whereas Flame Grant Me Strength, this increases your physical attack power as well as your fire attack power. On the other hand, it will enhance the power of physical incantations such as Beastial Sling or Pest Threads. So it has some positives and it has some negatives. Between the two, I think Golden Vow is overall universally better for most builds, but they're both S tier incantations. Speaking of Beastial Sling, I also believe this is an S tier pick, as well as, of course, Catch Flame. These are two incantations that come out very quickly, and they're absolutely required for faith builds that want to make use of chain casting, which makes many incantations much better than if they weren't using that. Simply put, chain casting is the ability to use a quick incantation or spell and then follow it up with a different incantation that has a chain effect to it. Home Bolt is a great example of that. The big magma shot of the dragon incantations is another, where the first animation and wind up begins slowly, but the second and third and follow-ups, they're a lot quicker. By using Catch Flame or Beastial Sling from the air, then following up with the other incantation, you're going to cast the following thing that might be a lot slower normally, much quicker. That makes these absolute meta picks even if you're not using them for their damage. Beastial Sling is great for chipping people out or even interrupting and mini staggering them, and Catch Flame is awesome in combination with trading or melee combos. They're both fantastic incantations on their own, further enhanced by the fact that they allow for chain casting for incantations, so obviously S tier. Another that I'm going to put in S tier as well is going to be Honed Bolt. This one more for its damage and purpose, yet it's hyper fast and very effective in PvE or PvP. Single target lightning strike from very far away. Of course, the follow-up casts are even faster than the starting one, so if you can use the quick casting or chain casting, then this benefits from it greatly. Even if not, you're able to spam this, catching people during their rolls, chipping out massive chunks of health in PvP, and in PvE, you don't even have to think about it. If it's weak to lightning in any way, you can just spam this down on them and it does so much damage. There's not much to explain on that one. This is a hyper good incantation. Just like Giatnsflame take the final S tier incantation for this list. This is due to it being one of the hardest hitting incantations in the entire game, and it feels great and it looks great to just throw a giant fireball at your enemy and see them burn in pain. Weirdly, I don't see this incantation that much in PvP, perhaps because it's not too hard to avoid. Certainly more viable in an invasion scenario where the enemy isn't always able to see you, but in PvE, of course, it's an absolute powerhouse, especially when the enemy is weak to fire in any way, and of course, there are so many who are. It's awesome and important to me that there are a few incantations that are top tier, that are literally just it does this damage and this kind of damage, and it's really good. The stable and awesome ones like Home Bolt and Giatnsflame Take Thee are great examples of that. But I've kind of accidentally just done a bunch of S tier picks here, so let's mix it up a little bit now. Let's start with two favorites for me. We have the Bloodflame Blade, which is an A tier pick for me. Enhancing your weapon with the power of the Cursed Blood, you have a bit of fire damage. You have bleed buildup on a weapon that might otherwise not have it, but if it does, hey, even better. But we recently discovered that there's a way to augment your Ashes of War using a weapon buff like this. So by applying, say, this bleed build up to a weapon, you can then use a ranged Ash of War, and then that ranged Ash of War will become a bleed ranged Ash of War, suddenly turning many ranged Ashes of War that are just fine into something super deadly and honestly really good. We've made whole builds around this, not only because it's really fun, but it's also very effective, which might surprise you that I put the other one in a C grade. This is the Blackflame Blade. Once again, combined with Ashes, you can make a ranged version of this buff. What it does is enhance your weapon with Black Flame, so that deals damage and percent health over time. Again, making ranged Ashes of War that normally are just raw damage also have that fire tick. That's very good, but there's a major downside to this buff. It lasts almost no time. Fortunately, it does have a quick cast, so if you do an attack and then cast it, it comes out really quick, and then you can do an Ash of War or two, but it is awkward just how short this buff actually is. Unless your build's completely based on it, it's going to be kind of inconvenient. Still very cool, very fun, and one that, again, we made a build for. Now, when it comes to bleed builds, or goddamn, so many builds, especially in PvP, this one is a true staple. Swarm of Flies is just so good. Send out a swarm of flies that's going to go to a target and then blow up and bleed and create a cloud of building bleed. Why this is so good is not necessarily the damage it does or the status buildup. It's the pressure that it creates. In PvP, if you send this slow moving projectile out, they know they don't want to get hit by it. So if you send out another incantation or a ranged Ash of War or run them down with melee attacks or whatever at the same time, you create a pick your poison scenario with the slow moving incantation. So whether you're using a bleed build or not, this is always super useful, and it's something that I find myself struggling not to include in nigh on every build because of just that simple pick your poison concept. In PvE, it's going to be nice enough building some extra bleed build, and of course going to be nice in a bleed build for that, but I see it really shine in PvP, and in that scenario, it's definitely an A tier pick, which is also how I would rate Pest Threads. This physical incantation is another that can be increased by Flame Grant Me Strength, but more importantly than that is the incantation itself, sending out all these many threads that go at the target. In PvP, that's super annoying to deal with, and yet you can chain cast it to spam them out even faster, and it does some reasonable damage to do so. Its tracking is really good, and again, you can spam that out even in PvE. It's one of those incantations that's just reliable and effective from the moment you use it. So I really like this one, especially because we can make it stronger. Now here's one that might confuse you. I'm actually going to put the basic heal, not like one of the stronger heals, just the basic heal in B tier. And it comes down to, well, one specific aspect. It is the ultimate counter to one enemy type in Elden Ring, of course those being the Revenants. If you run up to them and use a heal that's AoE meant to heal you or allies around you, well, it kind of does like opposite effect to them, burning them, dealing massive damage, and even hard stunning them, leaving them in a critical, vulnerable state. I cannot express enough how much easier this makes facing Revenants. They're absolutely a joke when you use even a basic low-level heal, which may be the best option because it comes out so quick, it's a fast cast. Now, I'm not going to rate it any higher than B because, yeah, that's kind of its main effect. The heal is nice and all, but the fact that it hard counters one of the most annoying enemies in the game, it's a good incantation. Another very good incantation, but one that's kind of awkward, much like the blade buffs, is Oflame, which is basically the powered up version of Catchflame. And because of that, it's actually worse. You see, it's got a longer cast time, and though its damage is much better, and yeah, it's like the better version if you're using it for just using damage, its relevance is just nowhere near as much as Catchflame. It's not one that you'll use for chain casting, so that's a major negative, but even then, just the longer cast time means that it's not really something you can combo out and surprise people in PvP nearly as well, and there's the downsides of it just being, yeah, a bigger, more expensive spell. So it is good, and there's nothing wrong with using it, it's just the potential of chain casting from Catchflame It's just too good to ignore. What about some D tier picks though? We've got nothing there right now, and there's two that I'm going to include in that. First is Howl of Shariri, which in itself is not great. An AoE madness spell, so it only works on, you know, tarnished and certain enemies. It doesn't do that much damage, and the buildup of madness is not that amazing either. So why is it even on this list? Well, it's because it gives you a 25% damage buff, which makes it relevant in some way. That stacks with other buffs as well, so it becomes kind of relevant if you're using a madness build to, say, take a 25% damage increase. Like, problem is you're not really using it for any other reason, making it awkward, but one that must at least be acknowledged for madness builds. The other D tier pick is one you might expect. This is Fire's Deadly Sin, and while it has some silly uses where you're dealing tick damage over time, like maybe you're trying to kill Melina, your maiden, for some reason, or you're trying to expunge the frost buildup on an enemy you've just built so you can pop them for more damage faster. There are ways you can use this to make it useful, it's just the damage it does, and obviously the negative of hurting yourself, really outweighs the positives. It's effective in some builds, and of course it was once very strong until fixed and nerfed. But it's got to be on the list in some form, so D seems fair. Now let's fill out our C tier picks because there are actually quite a few. For example, Unendurable Frenzy, another frenzy incantation. This is super effective if you can catch someone out with it. Channeling it and walking forward while blasting out these madness attacks, it can actually do a lot of damage in PvE or PvP. Of course, they need to be at at the right range because you don't want to be interrupted while you do it because you're a little bit vulnerable. There was that meme build of the Iron Man build that was incredible back around the time Elden released, and this was the basis of that build. It's a super cool incantation, but it has some serious risks versus reward when you use it. Still, I really like it though, so it's C tier for me. Another C tier pick then is another one that's a little bit specific. Law of Regression is obviously lore relevant and an important incantation for revealing the secrets of the game. But in PvP, it has a very effective use. It will strip the players of their buffs. So in many cases with certain buffs that have, say, just double buffed, taken a potion, buffed up their weapon, and so on and so forth, one Law of Regression and all of that is gone, and then they're just upset. Hilarious in invasions or duels, if you're willing to mess with someone. Some people consider it BM to use this in duels where you're trying to be using a specific build, but I think it's fair game. Obviously, again, it's a bit of a specific use, but an effective and hilarious one, so C pick for me. Here's another madness-based incantation. This is the Frenzied Burst, which I still have like a really good place in my heart for. It's just a cool incantation. Sniping from your eyeball with the power of madness at long range and that twirl effect that it has, it's awesome. But it is mechanically a shadow of its former self, with madness being nerfed and changed. You aren't getting nearly as much threat from this. It is something now rarely seen in PvP, and for those reasons, really. Still, you can make it work if you're willing to commit to it, and it's a nice tool to have as a madness build for long range attacks. Here's one I really don't want to put it in C grade, and I want to rate it higher, but I just can't. The Black Blade, that incantation that uses the destined death of Malekith, and a really cool animation where you're pulling out the real blade, the destined death blade you see in the fight. Able to whip it around and flip, sending out that arc at range, and not even once but twice in combo. The problem is, it feels like the worst way to do destined death in the game. The weapons with their Ashes of War is just way more effective, especially the dagger for a ranged one. It's too slow even after it was made quicker in my opinion. It doesn't do enough damage for how expensive it actually is, and you're left very exposed when you use it. The tracking on it's not amazing, so it's super easy to evade in PvP. You can get this off though, obviously, much like anything, and it'll do a bit of damage over time, and take their health pool down by 10%, and that stacks with the Ashes of War, so you can get even further effect from it. Definitely great because of that then, and that's why it's here on this list, but lower rated, because I feel like it still needs more love. Out of the three, whether it's the Ashes of War or this, I feel like this should do more damage over time, or more initial burst damage than the others, at least to make it worth using. But for now, it's a C tier pick. For our last set of incantations we're going to look at then, it's all rather dragon-based. First up then, we have Placid Deus Exs Ruin. Despite this being arguably the coolest animation in the game, or at least one of them, it's not that effective and very rarely seen. You're able to jump and while hanging in the air do this long lightning fire breath attack, sweeping around, blowing everything up. It looks and feels amazing, but the effect of it is, of course, not so much. Especially in PvE, where you're just going to get knocked out of it in so many scenarios. It just doesn't do enough to allow for how exposed and vulnerable you are, especially in, say, a boss fight, where you're just never really going to get the full value out of that. The best way to use this is to suddenly explode it on the enemy on the initial cast, and then hope that they mess up by panicking and running away from you into the mid-range, where it's just most effective. More than likely, they just hit you and knock you out of it, range you in some way, whatever. It just doesn't do enough. You're just too exposed. I feel like you should be able to cast this and then cancel it, and then that would make it a bit more viable. Above that, I'm going to put a bunch of the different basic dragon incantations into B grade. There's Paralysis Mist, Greyol's Roar, Giatnsflame, Smaragd Glintstone Breath. These types of incantations here, just realized I missed one there we go, are all pretty damn good and fun to use, especially when you're using the chain cast effect of Catch Flame or Beastial Sling beforehand to get to the second cast that are going to be way faster and more effective. The raw damage they do is great, they're very effective and fun to use, especially against enemies weak to, say, the element type or the damage type that you're using in that scenario. Of course, the problem is, much like Placid Deus Exs Ruin, you're held in place, you're vulnerable, you need to time these well. So chain casting's the way to go with these to make them work, other than, say, Greyol's Roar, which just comes out and does good damage. I also really like what they've done with dragon incantations in general in this game compared to the other ones, where you look like this decrepit, malnourished baby dragon. Here you're summoning their heads, and it's a bit more effective and visceral. Above all of those, I'm going to obviously put the Scarlet Rot one as the best one. Ezek's Decay is incredible. Basically the best way to get Scarlet Rot on an enemy incredible in invasions and multi-target scenarios, great in PvE for just getting Scarlet Rot on the boss and maintaining it throughout the whole fight. It's fun to use, it's effective. I still think it's the best one out of all of them. People tell me the normal versions of these, the ones that aren't named, are also worth considering because less FP and, yeah, good damage. And that's something for you guys to decide yourself, I suppose. The very last incantation I'm going to mention, though, is also dragon-based, working with them rather than, you know, eating their hearts and using their spells. This is the Ancient Dragon's Lightning Strike, and I put it in A grade at the bottom of A grade because it's great in PvE specifically. You know, against a boss fight, training dummy, whatever, they're not really going to evade this. You can just spam it and absolutely burn through health pools. It's flashy, it's fun, it's cool, but it's a PvE spell rather than anything else. But, yeah, there you have it, actually. This is my final list. What do you think? This is my rating of them compared to one another. I still think all of these are some of the best in the game. But let me know what you think. Is there anything I missed that should be on this list? Personally, again, I'd like to see a little bit more love for incantations in maybe future patches, like 1.07. There's a lot of underused incantations, and for good reason, because they're not good. A bit of rebalancing could change the meta, and I think that's always only good for the game. For now, though, I've been Hollow, you've been you. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.